I am Ethan, 26 years old. 3 years ago, I walked into the biggest job interview of my life wearing a battered, oversized suit held together by nothing but cheap safety pins and sheer desperation. While I was fighting tooth and nail to build a future, my parents handed me my older brother's garbage and told me I didn't deserve new things. They let me walk out the door looking like a walking joke, ready to be humiliated in front of dozens of high-profile corporate executives. But there is one thing they didn't know. The brilliant, cutthroat CEO of that exact company had a deep, dark history with my golden boy brother. And now, my family is practically begging for my forgiveness while watching their own lives fall apart. Before I tell you exactly how I took my power back, please hit that like button if you believe that justice always finds a way. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to the morning everything changed. The company tower downtown had mirrored glass so clean it reflected the clouds better than the sky itself. I stood on the pavement outside, my reflection staring back at me like a distorted funhouse mirror. Every single movement I made felt incredibly wrong. I was wearing a suit that had belonged to my brother years earlier, back when he was interviewing for his own elite programs. The pants were way too loose at the hips, bunching up awkwardly, and noticeably too short at the ankles, exposing my scuffed, worn-out dress shoes. The heavily padded shoulders widened my frame unnaturally, making me look like a little kid playing dress-up in his father's closet. I checked my sleeves 3 times before I finally forced my feet to walk through those heavy revolving glass doors. The lobby was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all sleek marble and polished steel, filled with people who looked like they stepped out of a financial magazine. And then there was me. I could physically feel people noticing my appearance, their eyes darting over my ill-fitting clothes, before they politely pretended not to see me. I walked up to the reception desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. The woman handing out visitor badges glanced quickly at my suit, her eyes catching the strange, bulky folds at my waist, before she snapped her gaze quickly back to her computer screen. She didn't say a word, but her silence was deafening. 12th floor, she muttered, sliding a keycard across the polished counter. I thanked her far too quickly, my voice tight, and rushed toward the elevators. The elevator ride up was agonizing. It was completely silent except for the soft, generic instrumental music piping through the speakers and the loud, synthetic sound of my oversized sleeve brushing against itself whenever I dared to move. 2 other candidates stood beside me in the confined space. They were wearing immaculate, tailored navy suits that actually belonged to them. They looked sharp, confident, and perfectly in their element. One of them, a guy with perfect hair and an expensive watch, looked over at me and smiled kindly. I knew that smile. It was pity. And somehow, receiving that polite, sympathetic smile made me feel immensely worse than if he had just laughed in my face. I kept my eyes glued to the digital floor indicator, praying for the doors to open, praying to just become invisible. I stepped out onto the 12th floor and was directed into a massive conference room that overlooked the entire city. It had floor-to-ceiling glass walls, a ridiculously long walnut table running down the center, and crystal water pitchers that remained completely untouched by the nervous candidates. I immediately walked toward the back and chose the chair nearest to the corner, desperately hoping that less of me would be visible to the recruiters. I sat down stiffly and kept my leather portfolio resting squarely on my lap to hide my waistline. Beneath that folder, the fabric bunched unnaturally around the sharp metal of the safety pins holding my pants up. One by one, the candidates were called into the inner offices for their interviews. Some came back looking confident and energized, while others came back pale and shaken. The waiting was torture. I remember staring at my faint reflection in the dark, tinted window beside me and thinking about how incredibly tired I looked for a 26-year-old. I didn't look sad, just deeply worn down in very specific places. Suddenly, the heavy oak door opened again, but instead of another junior recruiter carrying a clipboard, a woman walked in. I recognized her immediately from countless Forbes articles and Bloomberg interviews. It was Victoria Vance, the founder and CEO of the company. She was a legend in the industry, the kind of formidable leader whose interviews and business strategies became case studies for Ivy League business schools online. The moment she stepped into the room, the atmosphere shifted. Everyone in the conference room straightened up in their chairs automatically. She greeted her hiring team first, speaking in low, authoritative tones, and then she turned and glanced around at the remaining candidates waiting in the chairs. Her sharp, calculating eyes swept over the expensive suits and polished shoes until they landed on me. Her eyes stopped, not a brief passing glance. They stopped dead on me. My stomach dropped. I looked away first, staring hard at my portfolio, my face burning with intense shame. She continued walking toward the far side of the long walnut table, her heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. But then, she paused halfway there. She turned her body completely toward my dark corner. "You," she said gently, her voice cutting through the silent room. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I genuinely thought I had already broken some unspoken corporate rule just by existing in her space. I slowly lifted my head. Yes. She didn't ask about my resume. She didn't ask about my qualifications. She stood there and looked closely at the ridiculously padded shoulders of my suit, the hastily folded cuffs of my sleeves, and the uneven, jagged line near my waist where one side of my pants sat noticeably higher than the other. Then, she asked me something that nobody in my entire life had ever asked me before. "Did someone make you wear that?" The entire room went dead still. Every eye was on me. I felt a wave of hot, prickling heat crawl up my neck instantly. I tried to stammer out an excuse to protect the very family that had put me in this position. "It's fine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. No," Victoria interrupted quietly, taking a step closer. "I know what that looks like." It wasn't pity in her eyes. It was absolute recognition. And in that frozen second, my mind violently pulled me back to the exact nightmare that had dressed me in this armor of humiliation. To understand the absolute gravity of that moment, you have to understand the toxic ecosystem I grew up in. In my family, love wasn't a given right. It was a transactional currency, and I was always overdrawn. My father, Arthur, was a stoic, rigid man who viewed his children strictly as financial assets. My mother, Beatrice, was a master of psychological warfare. Together, they had created a perfect, heavily guarded shrine for their ultimate creation. My older brother, Julian. Julian was the undeniable golden boy. He was handsome, incredibly charismatic, and utterly hollow inside. While I spent my teenage years working grueling weekend shifts at a local hardware store just to buy my own school supplies, Julian was handed everything on a silver platter. My parents completely drained their savings and leveraged their future 401k to pay for his elite private college tuition, entirely convinced he was their golden ticket to an early retirement and a massive inheritance of social status. I went to community college, paying my own way, invisible in my own home. The stark contrast peaked the week before my life-changing interview. I had been grinding for months, surviving on cheap ramen and instant coffee, preparing for this one shot at a top-tier analyst position. It was a role that offered a massive starting salary and a clear path to a senior promotion. I was so close to breaking out of my family's cycle of emotional poverty. That same week, we had a rare family dinner. My parents had called us to the dining room to make a grand announcement. Beatrice, practically glowing with pride, handed Julian a small velvet box. Inside was a shiny set of keys. They had purchased him a brand new Porsche. To reward our son for his relentless hard work, my father announced, raising his wine glass. Julian had recently secured a mid-level management job at a flashy marketing firm. What my parents conveniently ignored was the fact that he had been fired from his previous 2 jobs for insubordination and cutting corners. But in their eyes, he could do no wrong. They were essentially funding his lavish lifestyle while I was rationing my groceries. I sat at the end of the table, quietly eating my dry chicken, watching Julian smirk as he twirled the Porsche keys around his finger. He looked over at me, his eyes filled with that familiar, mocking superiority. He knew I was struggling. He knew I was terrified about the upcoming interview. But in my family, if you weren't the golden boy, you were just collateral damage. I didn't say a word. I just swallowed my food and focused on the upcoming interview. All I needed was one decent suit. Just one armor to wear into battle. I had foolishly assumed that maybe, just maybe, seeing me on the verge of a massive career breakthrough would earn me a tiny fraction of their support. I was so incredibly wrong. The night before my interview, the anxiety was eating me alive. I had reviewed my market analysis spreadsheets until my eyes blurred, but I couldn't stop thinking about my wardrobe. My only suit was a cheap, threadbare thing from Walmart I had bought for a high school debate tournament. It was faded, frayed, and looked completely unprofessional for a corporate boardroom. I swallowed my pride, walked into the living room, and did something I hadn't done in years. I asked my parents for help. I asked for a small loan, just a couple of $100s, to run to a department store and buy a basic off-the-rack suit. I promised to pay them back from my very first paycheck. My father didn't even lift his eyes from the glowing screen of his phone. He just kept scrolling through his stocks. My mother, however, let out a long, theatrical sigh, as if my request was an unbearable burden. She stood up, walked down the hall to the storage closet, and came back holding a plastic garment bag. She unzipped it and laid a heavy, dark suit across the back of the dining chair without even looking at me. I recognized it instantly. It was Julian's old suit. He had worn it 3 years earlier when he was aggressively interviewing for graduate programs. Back then, my parents proudly described spending nearly $1,000 on his tailored clothes as a critical investment in his future. But Julian was a broad-shouldered, heavy-set guy who spent his time at expensive gyms. I was lean and wiry from years of stress and skipping meals. "It's still good," my mother said coldly, smoothing the lapel. "You just need to iron it." I stared at the fabric. The sleeves hung over the edge of the dining chair like empty, lifeless arms. "Mom, this is huge on me," I pleaded quietly, my voice cracking. "It doesn't fit me." She finally looked at me, her eyes entirely devoid of warmth. "It covers you, doesn't it?" she snapped. I looked over at my father, hoping for just an ounce of reason. "Dad, please, this is the biggest interview of my life. If I walk in wearing this, I'll look ridiculous." My father finally stopped scrolling. He looked up, his expression hardened with disgust. "You're lucky you have anything at all," he growled. "Some people walk into interviews with nothing." I remember standing there in the middle of the living room, frozen, lingering much longer than necessary. I was foolishly waiting for someone, anyone, to soften the brutal sentence. I waited for a flinch, a hesitation, a spark of parental instinct. Nobody did. The silence in the room was heavy and suffocating. Then, my mother turned around and added the part that would stay violently etched in my memory forever. She wasn't angry. She wasn't loud. Her voice was just calm and absolutely decided. "You don't deserve new things every time life gets difficult," she said. Felt like a physical blow to the chest. They had just bought my brother a luxury sports car, but I didn't deserve a basic suit to build my career. I picked up the heavy fabric from the chair, my hands numb, and walked back to my small bedroom. I realized then that I was completely, utterly alone. By midnight, my tiny bedroom had become a war room of desperation. I had the suit spread out on my bed, trying to figure out how to alter a garment meant for a man 50 pounds heavier than me. I had absolutely no sewing skills, no money for an emergency tailor, and the clock was ticking down to morning. I frantically dug through a dusty, rusted sewing tin I found in the back of a cabinet and managed to scrounge up exactly 3 large metal safety pins. I put the oversized pants on, pulling the excess fabric tightly at the back of my waist. I folded the heavy wool over itself and aggressively pinned the waist from the inside, forcing the sharp metal through the thick layers. I sat on the edge of my bed, sweating, and pulled up a video call with Chloe, my only real friend and former college roommate. She lived out of state, but she stayed up with me, trying to talk me through a panic attack. "Ethan, breathe." Chloe's voice crackled through my phone speaker. "Just wear a belt tightly. Put the jacket on. You're brilliant, okay? They're going to hire your brain, not your clothes. I stood up to check the mirror. The jacket draped over me like a tragic cape. I aggressively folded the long cuffs inward, trying to hide the frayed lining. Just as I tried sitting down on my chair to practice my posture, one of the cheap safety pins snapped open under the tension. The sharp, metal needle violently scratched my side, digging straight into my flesh. I winced, feeling a warm drop of blood form against my skin. I looked at the pin, my hands trembling with exhaustion and quiet rage. I didn't even bother fixing it. I left it there anyway, a physical reminder of my family's love. Right at that moment, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Aunt Clara. Clara was the kind of woman who loved attending neighborhood HOA meetings just to spread rumors about pending divorces and messy lawsuits. She operated under the guise of the caring aunt, but she was Beatrice's ultimate informant. I answered, putting her on speaker. "Hi, Aunt Clara." "Oh, Ethan, sweetie," she cooed, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Your mother just texted me. She said you were being quite ungrateful about Julian's lovely suit. You know, you really shouldn't stress your parents out like this. They've sacrificed so much." I gripped the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned stark white. She was calling to confirm my misery so she could report back to my mother. "I'm not stressing them out, Clara. I just wanted to look professional." "Well, beggars can't be choosers, honey," she said cheerfully. "Just make sure you smile. A good attitude hides a lot of flaws." She hung up, leaving me standing in the silence of my room, bleeding slightly from the waist. I stared at my reflection in the cheap, cracked mirror on my closet door. I looked pathetic, but beneath the oversized wool and the sharp metal pins, a deep, icy resolve began to form in my chest. I was going to survive tomorrow. I had to. I thought the absolute worst was over, that nothing else could possibly derail my chances. I was so incredibly wrong. The morning of the interview, the sky was a heavy, slate gray. I hadn't slept a single minute. My eyes burned, and my stomach was tied in tight, agonizing knots. I carefully put on the pinned suit, wincing as the broken safety pin pressed against my bruised side. I had agreed to meet Liam at a local coffee shop right before heading downtown. Liam was a senior guy from my university, a couple of years ahead of me. He had landed a job in the exact same corporate sector I was applying to. More importantly, Liam was part of Julian's inner social circle, the guys who drank expensive scotch and talked loudly about their stock portfolios. A few days ago, surprisingly, Liam had reached out and offered to give me an exclusive prep folder to help me secure that massive starting salary. He claimed it contained inside information on the company's risk assessment models. I walked into the coffee shop, feeling everyone's eyes on my ridiculous outfit. Liam was sitting at a corner table, sipping an espresso, looking effortlessly sharp in a fitted blazer. When he saw me, a strange, fleeting smirk crossed his face before he quickly masked it with a look of serious mentorship. "Ethan, man, you look ready," Liam said, sliding a thick manila folder across the table. "Thanks for this, Liam. Seriously. I owe you," I said, grabbing the folder like it was a life preserver. My family had abandoned me, but maybe, just maybe, networking and brotherhood were real. "Don't mention it," Liam said smoothly, leaning back. "The interview panel is going to drill you on their Q3 market cap projections. Study those numbers in the folder. Memorize them. If you drop those specific metrics, Henderson, the HR director, will hire you on the spot. Trust me." I nodded fervently, clutching the folder to my chest. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Liam smiled. It was a cold smile, but I was too desperate to analyze it. I left the coffee shop and headed toward the bus stop. As I walked, I pulled out my phone to check the transit schedule. That's when a notification popped up on my screen. It was an accidental tag on a social media post from a mutual college friend. It was a photo of Liam from the night before, sitting at a loud, expensive downtown bar. And sitting right next to him, clinking a glass of whiskey against Liam's, was my brother, Julian. My blood ran completely cold. The caption read, "Celebrating early with the boys." A sickening realization washed over me. Liam wasn't helping me. Liam was Julian's best friend. Why would Julian, who loved nothing more than watching me fail, let his friend hand me the golden key to a six-figure salary? The answer was painfully obvious. He wouldn't. I practically ran back toward my apartment complex to catch the express bus line, my mind racing with 100 different terrifying scenarios. I was so distracted by the folder in my hands that I almost walked straight into the hood of a sleek, silver vehicle parked illegally across the pedestrian walkway. It was the brand new Porsche. The driver's side window smoothly rolled down, revealing Julian. He was wearing designer sunglasses despite the heavy clouds overhead. Sitting in the passenger seat was his girlfriend, Vanessa, holding a venti iced coffee and looking at me like I was something she had just scraped off her expensive shoe. "Whoa, watch the paint, Ethan. This thing costs more than your life," Julian barked, revving the engine loudly. Several people on the sidewalk turned to look at us. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart hammering. "Move the car, Julian. I have a bus to catch." Vanessa leaned over, dramatically pulling her sunglasses down her nose. She let out a loud, piercing laugh. "Oh my God, Julian, you weren't kidding. He actually wore it. He looks like a little boy wearing his daddy's clothes." Julian smirked, tapping his fingers against the leather steering wheel. "Mom told me she gave you my old garbage. I told her to just throw it away, but she said it was perfect for you. A hand-me-down for a hand-me-down kid." The humiliation was suffocating. They had parked outside my route intentionally. They had come here just to make sure I left for the biggest moment of my life feeling entirely worthless. "You're pathetic, Julian," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. Julian's smirk vanished, replaced by a nasty sneer. "Good luck today, little brother. Try not to embarrass the family name more than you already do. I hear that company only hires actual talent." He slammed his foot on the gas. The Porsche roared to life, aggressively peeling out of the crosswalk. I had to jump back to avoid getting clipped. As I jerked backward, the sudden movement put immense strain on my altered suit. I heard a distinct pop. Another safety pin had ripped open inside my waistband. The sharp metal drove violently into the soft skin of my hip, deeper this time. I gasped in pain, grabbing my side. The physical agony perfectly mirrored the intense betrayal I was feeling. I stood alone on the concrete, bleeding in my brother's oversized clothes, watching the taillights of his luxury car disappear into the city traffic. I refused to let them break me. I turned around and stepped onto the waiting bus, pulling the manila folder from my bag. The bus ride downtown took 45 minutes. I sat in the very back, avoiding eye contact with the morning commuters who were staring at my strange, boxy silhouette. Ignoring the sharp, stinging pain in my side, I cracked open Liam's prep folder. I am not a naturally gifted genius, but I am relentless. For the past 6 months, I had essentially lived in the public library, studying market analysis, risk models, and corporate financial structures. I knew the industry baseline. I knew how these numbers were supposed to look. I scanned the first page of Liam's documents. At first glance, it looked incredibly professional. Official letterheads, complex bar graphs, dense financial jargon. But as I read the Q3 market cap projections he had told me to memorize, my stomach plummeted. The math was completely inverted. The data wasn't just slightly off. It was catastrophic. The document suggested a high-risk leverage strategy that any entry-level analyst would know was financial suicide. If I walked into that boardroom and confidently pitched these numbers to Mr. Henderson, I wouldn't just fail the interview. I would be permanently blacklisted from the entire industry for sheer incompetence. Liam hadn't just given me bad advice. He had handed me a loaded gun and told me to pull the trigger on my own career. And he did it because Julian paid him to. My own brother had engineered an elaborate trap to ensure I remained the family failure, guaranteeing his permanent spot on the golden pedestal. A cold, dark fury settled over me. It wasn't the fiery, chaotic anger of a teenager. It was the absolute, icy clarity of a man who realizes he has nothing left to lose. My family didn't just neglect me. They actively wanted to destroy me. I looked down at the thick manila folder. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I stood up as the bus approached my stop, walked toward the exit doors, and calmly dropped Liam's sabotage documents straight into the sticky, overflowing trash can near the driver's seat. I didn't need their fake data. I didn't need their toxic charity. Every single thing I needed to pass this interview was already locked inside my own head. The bus doors hissed open. I stepped out onto the busy downtown pavement, the towering glass facade of the corporate headquarters looming above me. I was bleeding, wearing clown clothes, and completely alone in the world. But I was ready for war. That brings us back to the lobby, the sprawling, immaculate reception area where my nightmare truly began. As I mentioned earlier, standing there with the uneven waistline and the heavily padded shoulders, the social isolation was profound. Sarah, the receptionist who handed me my visitor badge, had initially avoided my gaze. But as I waited awkwardly near the security gates, I saw her looking at me from behind her monitor. She noticed my hand pressing rigidly against my side, trying to alleviate the pain from the digging safety pin. She saw the faint, dark spot of blood blooming on the cheap fabric of my white undershirt just above my belt line. Sarah didn't say a word, but as a security guard walked past, she leaned over the counter and discreetly slid a small stack of thick, white napkins toward me. It was a tiny, silent gesture of humanity in a room full of corporate sharks. I took them, nodding my gratitude, and pressed them secretly against my side. Then came the elevator ride. That's where I met Marcus. Marcus was the candidate with the perfect hair, the expensive watch, and the tailored navy suit. As we rode up to the 12th floor, he looked me up and down. "Rough morning?" Marcus asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You know this is an interview for a senior analyst position, right? Not a casting call for a charity commercial." I didn't take the bait. I kept my eyes fixed forward. "My qualifications are in my resume, not my jacket," I replied evenly. Marcus let out a soft, mocking chuckle. "Sure, buddy. Let's see if Henderson agrees." The psychological warfare of the corporate world was just as vicious as my mother's dining room table. By the time I took my seat in the corner of that glass-walled conference room, hiding my waistline with my leather portfolio, the sheer weight of the crowd's judgment was suffocating. Every subtle glance, every polite clearing of a throat, was a reminder that I didn't belong. And then Victoria Vance walked in. As I told you earlier, the CEO stopped the entire room when she walked over to my corner and asked, "Did someone make you wear that?" When she interrupted my pathetic attempt to excuse my family's cruelty by saying, "No, I know what that looks like," the air in the room completely shifted. She didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with a profound, piercing recognition, as if she could see the invisible scars my parents had left on my psyche. Before I could even process what was happening, Victoria reached up and smoothly slipped off her own jacket. A stunning, charcoal blazer tailored with absolute precision. She walked directly over to my chair. "Here," she said, holding the heavy, expensive fabric out to me. I stared at it, completely paralyzed. "I can't take that," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You can borrow it," she replied firmly. Every single recruiter sitting at the long walnut table was watching us now. The other candidates, including Marcus, were staring with their mouths slightly open. I desperately wanted the floor of the 12th story to crack open and swallow me whole, but Victoria held the blazer out like this was the most ordinary, natural thing in the world. Her unwavering confidence somehow made refusing her impossible. "It'll fit better," she added softly. My hands shook violently as I slowly stood up, took off Julian's hideous, oversized jacket, and let it drop to the chair. I slid my arms into Victoria's blazer. It was flawless. It was perfect at the shoulders. The length covered the jagged, pinned waistline of my pants completely. The entire dynamic of the room changed after that. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody stood up and applauded. Nobody gave an inspirational movie speech. but the heavy, humiliating imbalance instantly disappeared. For the very first time that morning, the recruiters and the competitors looked directly at my face, rather than scanning my tragic clothes first. I had been given back my dignity. Victoria gave me one final, approving nod before she walked over to the panel of recruiters and took her seat at the head of the long walnut table. She didn't leave the room. She was staying for the interviews. I sat back down, the soft, premium fabric of the blazer wrapping around me like physical armor. The sharp pain from the safety pin at my hip was still there, a grounding reminder of where I came from, but the overwhelming shame had completely evaporated. I looked over at Marcus. His arrogant smirk was entirely gone, replaced by a nervous, tight-lipped frown. He suddenly realized that the charity case had just received the personal endorsement of the CEO. One by one, the names were called. Marcus went in. He came out 20 minutes later looking noticeably pale, his perfect hair slightly ruffled. The recruiters were tearing people apart in there. They were looking for weakness, for hesitation. Finally, the heavy oak door opened. Mr. Henderson, the notoriously ruthless HR director, stepped out holding a clipboard. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the remaining candidates until they landed on me. "Ethan," Henderson called out, his voice echoing off the glass walls. I stood up. I didn't shrink into myself. I didn't pull at my sleeves or try to hide my waist. I rolled my shoulders back, the charcoal blazer fitting perfectly, and picked up my leather portfolio. I left Julian's jacket crumpled on the waiting room chair, exactly where it belonged. I walked toward the boardroom doors with heavy, deliberate steps. I was about to face the most grueling intellectual firing squad of my life, armed with nothing but my own mind and the borrowed jacket of a billionaire. I was ready to burn down every single expectation my family had built for me. But absolutely nothing could have prepared me for the explosive truth that was waiting for me on the other side of that door. I walked into that boardroom feeling like a gladiator stepping onto the blood-soaked sand of a modern corporate coliseum. The heavy, solid oak door clicked shut behind me, completely sealing me inside a pristine, soundproof chamber of immense wealth and unyielding power. The conference room was breathtakingly intimidating. A massive, custom-built walnut table ran down the center, polished to such a high mirror shine that it flawlessly reflected the overcast city skyline looming outside the floor-to-ceiling glass walls. At the far end of this imposing table sat Mr. Henderson, the notoriously ruthless director of human resources. He was flanked on his right by 3 senior executive partners, all of them wearing impeccably tailored suits and peering at me over the rims of their expensive, designer eyeglasses. And standing perfectly still near the massive window, observing the entire execution squad with a quiet, terrifying intensity, was Victoria Vance, the CEO herself. I took my designated seat at the opposite end of the long walnut table. The charcoal blazer Victoria had just given me draped perfectly over my shoulders. It felt like a literal shield forged from premium wool. It successfully hid the catastrophic, safety-pinned mess of my brother's oversized pants underneath. I deliberately placed my leather portfolio squarely on the table in front of me, keeping my hands entirely visible, flat and steady. I was not going to let them see me bleed. I was not going to let them see me sweat. Mr. Henderson did not bother with any polite corporate pleasantries. He flipped open my manila file, barely glanced at my meticulously crafted resume, and launched straight into the interrogation. The questions were brutally difficult, surgically precise, and designed to be mentally exhausting. Henderson was a master at breaking candidates psychologically. He wanted to strip away any rehearsed, robotic answers and expose raw, unfiltered incompetence. He rapidly fired off complex, multi-layered scenarios covering international market analysis, aggressive risk assessment, systemic leadership failures, and highly specific ethical blind spots in corporate governance. "Let us talk about the upcoming third-quarter market cap projections," Henderson said, his voice a sharp, authoritative bark that echoed off the glass walls. He laced his fingers together, leaning heavily onto the polished wood like a predator cornering its prey. Assume we aggressively leverage our offshore assets in the European sector to rapidly cover the impending domestic deficit. What is the precise collateral fallout within a strict 12-month fiscal cycle, taking into account the new federal regulatory compliance laws? This was the exact, specific topic Liam had handed me the fake cheat sheet for. The heavily sabotaged folder that was currently rotting at the bottom of a sticky city trash can on a bus route. If I had blindly memorized Liam's numbers, if I had foolishly trusted my brother's best friend and his supposed insider knowledge, I would have confidently delivered an answer that would have made me the absolute laughingstock of the entire financial district. The data Liam provided suggested a high-risk leverage strategy that any competent entry-level analyst would recognize as financial suicide. If I pitched that to Henderson, I would not just fail the interview. I would be permanently blacklisted. But because I had spent the last 6 consecutive months practically living in the public library, studying the real data until my vision blurred, I saw the trap clearly. Furthermore, because I fully understood the vicious, cutthroat nature of my own family, my mind was sharper than ever. I looked Mr. Henderson dead in the eye. I did not blink. "You would not leverage the offshore assets at all?" I said, my voice projecting a calm, unwavering authority that surprised even me. Doing so under the current federal regulatory climate would trigger an automatic, mandatory audit from the Securities and Exchange Commission. It would expose the firm to a massive, multi-million-dollar class action lawsuit and completely tank shareholder confidence. Instead, the only viable mathematical strategy is to restructure the domestic debt, temporarily absorb the short-term loss in the third quarter, and immediately liquidate the underperforming commercial real estate portfolio in the southern sector. It stabilizes the baseline margin without betting the company's entire legacy on a regulatory coin toss. Mr. Henderson blinked. He actually blinked. The 3 senior partners seated next to him completely stopped writing on their yellow legal pads. The boardroom went dead silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the central air conditioning. I had not only dodged his lethal bullet, I had completely disassembled his weapon and slid the pieces back across the table. I caught a very subtle, almost imperceptible nod of approval from one of the older partners. Henderson cleared his throat, clearly thrown off balance by a 26-year-old kid from a community college casually dismantling his trick question with zero hesitation. For the next grueling 45 minutes, I was absolutely relentless. I did not just answer their questions. I anticipated their counter-arguments before they even formulated them. Every single time Henderson tried to back me into a corner regarding hostile corporate takeovers or predictive financial modeling, I used cold, hard logic and undeniable data to break out. I was not just fighting for a 6-figure salary. I was fighting for my fundamental right to exist. I was fighting to definitively prove that Arthur and Beatrice were entirely wrong about my worth. But halfway through the intense interrogation, the dynamic in the room shifted entirely. Victoria Vance pushed herself off the glass window and slowly walked over to the center of the table. She had not spoken a single word since I sat down. The moment she moved, Henderson completely fell silent. He deferred to her instantly. Victoria leaned her hands on the polished walnut, staring intensely into my eyes. She did not ask me about profit margins. She did not ask me about corporate real estate acquisitions or international tariffs. She asked something entirely unexpected and deeply profound. What do you do when people decide who you are before you speak? The question hung in the boardroom air like a heavy physical weight. It was so incredibly specific, so deeply personal, that I felt a sudden, sharp ache in my chest. She was asking about the lobby. She was asking about the receptionist's averted gaze. She was asking about Marcus mocking me in the elevator. Most importantly, she was asking about the oversized, ridiculous suit I had walked in wearing. She was asking about my entire existence as the invisible, discarded son of a toxic family. I knew better than to answer emotionally. In a room full of corporate sharks, you absolutely do not bleed. You do not show vulnerability. I took a slow, measured breath, locking my eyes with hers, ensuring my voice remained perfectly steady. You learn to become useful before you become visible, I said. You master the mechanics of the room so thoroughly that they have absolutely no choice but to respect your output, regardless of what they initially thought of your entrance. The silence that followed was absolute. Something flickered across Victoria's expression then. It was not mere professional approval. It was something significantly heavier. It was a profound, unspoken understanding between two individuals who knew exactly what it meant to fight their way out of the suffocating darkness of prejudice. Victoria slowly stood up straight. She looked at Henderson, then back to me. "I know exactly who put you in that suit, Ethan," she said, her voice echoing perfectly in the quiet room. My heart completely stopped beating for a full second. I stared at her, genuine, unadulterated shock washing over my face. I gripped the edges of my leather portfolio. "Excuse me, Julian," she said smoothly, dropping my brother's name like a live grenade in the middle of the boardroom. "Julian is your older brother, is he not? He shares your facial structure, though he significantly lacks your intellect and your integrity." The senior partners shifted uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. I was completely paralyzed. My mind raced, trying to calculate how the billionaire CEO of a multinational financial firm could possibly know my golden boy brother. 3 years ago, Julian sat in that exact chair you are sitting in right now, Victoria continued, her tone turning ice-cold and razor-sharp. He interviewed for our elite executive training program. He was incredibly arrogant, heavily perfumed, and wore a ridiculously expensive custom suit. He presented himself as a visionary. But during our standard, rigorous background check, my legal team discovered a massive discrepancy. He had completely plagiarized his entire final college thesis. He stole proprietary research ideas from his peers and presented them as his own original work. I personally threw him out of this building and permanently blacklisted his name from our entire corporate network. He is a textbook fraud. My mind was reeling. The walls of the room felt like they were spinning. Julian had never told anyone this truth. He had proudly told our parents that he had arrogantly rejected this company's lucrative offer because their corporate culture was beneath his talents. He had lied to protect his flawless golden boy image, and my parents had blindly, eagerly believed him. They had continued to fund his life based on a massive structural lie. "I saw you walk into my lobby today wearing the exact same suit he wore 3 years ago," Victoria said softly, her eyes filled with a fierce clarity. I recognized the custom tailoring on the lapel. A very expensive suit, completely ruined by the fact that it was draped over a young man who was clearly suffering. I know the exact kind of family dynamic that worships a charismatic fraud and violently punishes a quiet hard worker. I know exactly what they tried to do to you today. She picked up my printed resume from Henderson's desk and dropped it squarely in front of her. "Your brother is a parasite, Ethan. But you have the kind of raw resilience I cannot teach in a training seminar. You survived a system deliberately designed to destroy you, and you just dismantled my director of human resources using nothing but your brain." She looked at Henderson with absolute finality. "We are done here. Draw up the paperwork." After the interview officially ended, the recruiters thanked me politely. Their tones were completely devoid of the earlier arrogance and skepticism. They packed up their notes and respectfully told me they would be in touch very soon. I stood to leave, my legs feeling like they were made of heavy lead. The massive surge of adrenaline was slowly leaving my system, replaced by an overwhelming, intoxicating sense of vindication. As I turned toward the heavy oak doors, Victoria stopped me near the exit. "Your portfolio," she said quietly. I looked down. One of the cheap metal safety pins holding my brother's massive pants together had violently slipped loose beneath the fabric. The uneven, jagged waistband was fully exposed, a glaring, embarrassing symbol of my family's cruelty. She had noticed it, of course she had. Nothing escaped her. Without embarrassing me, without making a spectacle for the others to see, she stepped forward, reached over, and gently straightened the edge of the leather folder to cover my waist. "None of this is your shame," she said quietly. I could not answer. A massive, painful lump formed in my throat, threatening to choke me completely. If I opened my mouth, I would have broken down right there in the executive hallway. I nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, and walked out before my face betrayed my overwhelming emotion. I walked out of that magnificent building, stepped out into the cold, biting city air, and threw Julian's hideous, oversized jacket directly into the nearest public dumpster. I was never wearing someone else's failures ever again. Exactly 3 days later, I got the official offer. I was sitting on the edge of my creaky bed in my tiny, cramped bedroom when the email notification chimed on my phone. I opened the attached PDF document, my hands shaking slightly. It was not an offer for an internship. It was not a probationary entry-level placement. It was a full senior track analyst position, and the salary attached to it was absolutely staggering. It was more money in a single fiscal year than my parents had ever made combined in a decade. The contract included comprehensive health benefits, a generous 401k corporate match, a massive upfront signing bonus, and a direct, outline track to a department director promotion within 24 months. I had officially broken the cycle of generational poverty and emotional abuse. When the news inevitably broke within my household, the reaction from my family was a masterclass in severe psychological whiplash. My mother, Beatrice, actually forced herself to cry when she heard the exact salary figure. She stood in the cramped kitchen, dramatically wiping away fake, invisible tears, suddenly acting like she had been my biggest, most devoted cheerleader since the day I was born. My father, Arthur, completely changed his tune. He suddenly began introducing me to extended relatives on phone calls as our incredibly hard-working child. I listened from the hallway as he called Aunt Clara, loudly boasting about how his strict, disciplined parenting style had finally forged me into a massive corporate success. It was utterly sickening. It should have felt incredibly satisfying. It should have been a grand moment of triumph where I finally won their elusive love and respect. Instead, it felt entirely clinical. It felt exactly like watching terrible, untalented actors discover a major script revision halfway through filming a movie. They did not love me. They loved the money. They loved the prestige. They loved the bragging rights they could wield at the next neighborhood gathering. The ultimate climax of their sheer delusion happened exactly 1 week later at a so-called celebratory family dinner. Beatrice had spent the entire afternoon cooking a massive, expensive feast. It was the exact kind of elaborate meal usually reserved strictly for Julian's birthdays or Julian's alleged job promotions. Julian was sitting directly across the table from me, looking visibly agitated and sweating slightly. He had been unusually quiet since the news of my hiring. He knew the specific name of the company I was working for. He knew exactly what it meant. Halfway through the dinner, my father stood up and proudly raised his glass of expensive red wine. "To Ethan," Arthur proclaimed loudly, his face flushed with unearned pride. Absolute proof that our family genetics breed nothing but monumental success. I did not touch my glass. I did not smile. I just stared at him, my expression completely flat and unreadable. Beatrice leaned in across the table, giving me a sickeningly sweet, manipulative smile. "Now, Ethan, sweetheart, since you are going to be making such a wonderful, life-changing salary, your father and I were talking late last night. Julian has been under a terrible amount of stress lately with his car payments. The interest rate on the Porsche is quite a heavy financial burden for him right now. We think it would be a truly beautiful gesture of family loyalty if you used your new signing bonus to pay off the remaining balance of his car loan. Consider it a generous thank you gift for letting you borrow his lucky suit for the interview." The absolute, unmitigated audacity of the request hung heavily in the dining room air. They seriously wanted my hard-earned blood money to permanently fund the Golden Boy's luxury lifestyle. Julian smirked nervously, leaning back in his chair, fully expecting me to fold under the pressure like I always did when we were younger. "No," I said quietly. The fake smile dropped off Beatrice's face instantly, replaced by a look of genuine confusion. "Excuse me?" I said. "No. I am not paying a single dime for Julian's car. I am not paying for his insurance. I am not paying for his lifestyle. In fact, I am not giving this family anything ever again. Arthur slammed his wine glass down hard on the table. The dark red liquid splashed violently onto Beatrice's pristine white tablecloth. You ungrateful little brat. We put a solid roof over your head. We clothed you when you went into that boardroom. We fed you. You clothed me in garbage. I shot back, my voice remaining deadly calm, entirely devoid of any hysterical emotion. I did not raise my voice, but the sheer intensity of my tone made Arthur flinch. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. You want to talk about family loyalty? You want to talk about how supportive this family is? Let us talk about Liam. Julian's face instantly went completely paper white. All the blood drained from his cheeks. I unlocked my phone and slid it aggressively across the polished dining table. On the bright screen was a scanned, printed, and bound copy of the exact financial data Liam had given me at the coffee shop, placed directly side by side with the real, accurate data I had gathered myself. Your best friend, Liam, handed me heavily falsified market cap projections the morning of my interview, I explained, staring directly at Julian. It was a deliberate, meticulously calculated trap designed to make me fail catastrophically in front of the hiring board. If I had used his numbers, I would have been blacklisted. And I know for an absolute fact that you put him up to it, Julian. I saw the tagged photos on social media of you two celebrating my intended failure at a downtown bar the night before. Beatrice looked at the phone screen, her eyes wide, then snapped her gaze to Julian. Julian? Is this true? Did you try to sabotage your brother's job? Julian stammered pathetically, his confident, arrogant facade completely shattering into a million pieces. Mom, he is lying. He fabricated those documents. He is just making up pathetic excuses to hoard his money. He has always been intensely jealous of me. You know that. Jealous of what exactly? I asked, my voice dripping with pure, unadulterated ice. Jealous of the undeniable fact that exactly 3 years ago, you were violently thrown out of the exact same corporate building I just got hired in? Jealous of the fact that Victoria Vance, the billionaire CEO, personally fired you for plagiarizing your final college thesis and blacklisted your name from the entire financial sector. The silence in the dining room was deafening. It was the heavy, suffocating kind of silence that happens right after a bomb goes off, in the split second before the screaming starts. Arthur looked at Julian, his face contorted in absolute, devastating horror. The foundation of his entire worldview was crumbling before his eyes. What in the hell is he talking about, Julian? You explicitly told us you rejected their offer. You said they were not good enough for you. You said their starting salary was an insult. He lied to you, Dad, I stated clinically, delivering the final, fatal blow to the Golden Boy's legacy with surgical precision. He is a complete fraud. The company ran a standard background check and found out he is an intellectual thief. That is why he could never keep a stable job. That is why he is currently drowning in insurmountable debt. You recklessly drained your life savings and mortgaged your real estate properties for a con artist. You bet on the wrong horse. Arthur's face turned a violent, dangerous shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged. He stood up abruptly, knocking his heavy wooden chair backward onto the floor, and lunged across the dinner table. He raised his hand high, fully intending to slap me across the face, to physically beat me back into submission just like he had done countless times when I was a helpless teenager. But I was not a helpless teenager anymore. As his hand came crashing down, I reached up and caught his wrist midair. I gripped it with crushing, unyielding force, stopping his violent momentum completely. My knuckles turned stark white from the pressure. I looked at the man who had terrorized my youth, and I felt absolutely no fear. Do not you ever attempt to touch me again, I whispered, staring directly into his terrified, wide eyes. I shoved his arm back forcefully, stood up, and calmly straightened my shirt. I did not yell. I did not throw a tantrum. I simply looked at the three of them, a broken, pathetic, toxic trinity, and realized with absolute clarity that they had absolutely zero power over me anymore. Their spell was broken forever. "I am moving out tonight," I announced to the silent room. "Do not call me. Do not text me. If you or your golden boy ever try to contact my employer, or if you dare show up at my office building, I will have my corporate legal team hit you with a harassment lawsuit so fast it will bankrupt whatever you have left. Enjoy paying off the Porsche." I turned around and walked out of the dining room without looking back. I went straight to my bedroom, packed 2 duffel bags with my bare essentials, and walked out the front door. I left my house keys on the kitchen counter. I moved into Chloe's spare bedroom that very night, sleeping on a cramped, slightly deflated air mattress. And for the very first time in 26 years, I slept like a baby. I was finally completely free. Fast forward 6 months. A lot can happen in half a year when the universe finally decides to balance the scales of justice. I was absolutely thriving at the firm. I had utilized every single ounce of my grit, my intelligence, and my relentless work ethic to excel beyond everyone's expectations. In my 3rd month on the job, I caught a massive, deeply hidden discrepancy in a high-stakes corporate merger contract involving Mr. Sterling, one of our most lucrative VIP clients. By identifying that flaw, I saved the company tens of millions of dollars in potential legal liabilities and secured Mr. Sterling's loyalty for the next decade. That single, decisive act secured me a permanent spot as Victoria Vance's trusted right-hand analyst. I was personally negotiating massive real estate acquisitions, handling incredibly complex international portfolios, and building a legitimate, unshakable career. I was deeply respected. When I spoke in a meeting, senior partners listened. Marcus, the arrogant guy who had ruthlessly mocked my clothing in the elevator on my first day, was now sitting 3 desks down from me, directly reporting to my division. Life was incredibly, undeniably sweet. But the universal law of equivalent exchange meant that while my career was skyrocketing, my family was in a terrifying, uncontrollable freefall. Through the unavoidable, toxic grapevine of Aunt Clara, who had very quickly realized that I was the new golden goose and tried desperately, and entirely unsuccessfully, to get back into my good graces by feeding me information, I heard the complete, spectacular collapse of the family empire. Julian's fragile house of cards had spectacularly imploded. Without my parents' constant financial backing to endlessly bail him out of his terrible decisions, his reckless luxury spending caught up with him incredibly fast. He missed 3 consecutive monthly payments on the brand new Porsche. One rainy Tuesday morning, a massive repo truck backed into my parents' driveway and mercilessly dragged the luxury car away while Julian stood on the front lawn, screaming obscenities at the driver in front of the entire neighborhood. But the karma did not end there. Liam, the treacherous friend who had tried to sabotage my interview, faced his own brutal corporate reckoning. I had casually mentioned Liam's willingness to share strictly confidential market cap projections to a senior compliance officer at an industry networking event. An intense internal audit was immediately triggered at Liam's firm. They seized his computer and found a massive trail of leaked documents. He was terminated immediately for violating strict corporate confidentiality agreements and faced potential civil charges. Julian blamed Liam for getting caught. Liam blamed Julian for dragging him into a stupid family feud, and their toxic brotherhood rapidly dissolved into a bitter, ugly, and expensive lawsuit over shared gambling debts. As for my parents, the horrifying reality of their failed investment finally shattered their lifelong delusion. The college fund they had completely drained, the retirement 401k they had foolishly leveraged, the massive, high-interest loans they took out to constantly fund Julian's lavish lifestyle, it all came due at once. They were financially ruined. They were forced to dramatically downsize, selling the beautiful family home they prized so much and moving into a cramped, depressing 2-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town. Aunt Clara, entirely true to her vicious nature, spread the juicy news of their financial ruin to every single member of the local HOA before my parents even packed their first moving box. They were completely and utterly humiliated within their own elite social circle. They tried reaching out to me several times. They left pathetic, weeping voicemails demanding that I uphold my sacred duty as a son, and bail them out of foreclosure. I did not even bother listening to the full messages. I simply forwarded their phone numbers to my lawyer with strict instructions to draft a legally binding cease and desist letter. I felt absolutely nothing for them. I had no pity. I had no lingering anger. I just possessed a vast, quiet, and peaceful indifference. They were strangers to me now. Exactly a week after I officially secured my massive promotion to the director level, I walked into my private, glass-walled office and found a sleek, matte black box resting perfectly in the center of my mahogany desk. I walked over and carefully lifted the heavy lid. Inside, folded with immaculate precision and wrapped in premium tissue paper, was a brand new blazer. It was dark gray, heavily textured, and clearly tailored by an absolute master. It was not just an expensive piece of clothing. It was a piece of custom armor designed specifically for my exact measurements. There was no card on top. I gently lifted the heavy fabric, my fingers tracing the pristine, flawless stitching. I slid my hand into the breast pocket and pulled out a small, thick piece of premium cardstock. There was no long, emotional note. There were no flowery congratulations. Just one single sentence written in elegant, sharp ink. We're your own size now. I sat there at my desk for a very long time, just holding the jacket in my hands. The massive city buzzed outside my window, a million people rushing to their next destination. But inside my office, time stood completely still. I stared at the dark gray fabric, my vision blurring slightly with unshed tears. I did not cry because of the monetary value of the gift. I cried because, for the very first time in my entire 26 years of existence, someone had corrected the humiliation instead of explaining to me why I deserved it. Victoria Vance had not just given me a high-paying job. She had recognized my fundamental humanity. She had seen a desperate kid drowning in an oversized hand-me-down life, suffocating under the weight of a toxic family, and she had reached down and pulled him onto dry land. She gave me the ultimate permission to take up my own space in the world. I stood up, took off my standard suit jacket, and put the dark gray blazer on. It fit perfectly. It was not too wide at the shoulders. It was not too loose at the waist. It was exactly mine. Later that evening, I stood in the luxurious master bathroom of my new, high-rise downtown apartment. The bright city moonlight spilled through the frosted glass window, illuminating the spacious room in a soft, silvery glow. I took off my dress shirt and looked at myself in the large vanity mirror. Right above my right hip bone, there was a small, slightly raised, faded white scar. It was the exact spot where the cheap, rusted safety pin had violently ripped open and dug deeply into my flesh on the morning of that fateful interview. A permanent physical remnant of the darkest, most humiliating day of my life. For a very long time, I used to look at that tiny scar and feel a massive rush of sickening shame. I felt the phantom sting of my mother's cruel rejection, the cold, calculating dismissal in my father's eyes, the mocking, arrogant laughter of my brother leaning out from the window of his shiny Porsche. But looking at it tonight, wearing the tailored trousers of a man who commanded absolute respect in elite corporate boardrooms, the feeling was entirely different. The scar was not a mark of humiliation anymore. It was a medal of survival. It was undeniable proof that I had walked through the absolute fire of a toxic, narcissistic family system and survived without losing my soul. They had tried to bury me in the oversized, suffocating weight of an abusive lineage. They threw dirt on me, fully expecting me to choke. But they did not realize I was a seed. Establishing strict, unbreakable boundaries with toxic family members is arguably the hardest thing a human being can ever do. Society constantly feeds us this incredibly toxic, guilt-ridden narrative that family is absolutely everything, that blood is always thicker than water, and that you must endlessly forgive the people who share your DNA, no matter how profoundly they destroy your mental health or sabotage your future. But let me tell you something I learned the absolute hard way, sitting in boardroom meetings and dealing with multimillion-dollar contracts. Blood simply makes you biologically related. It is a biological accident. Loyalty, mutual respect, and fundamental human decency are what actually make you family. If the people who are supposed to protect you are the exact ones holding the knife to your back, you do not owe them your life. You do not owe them your success. Walking away from Arthur, Beatrice, and Julian was not a petty act of revenge. It was an act of profound, necessary self-preservation. It was the defining moment I finally chose myself. The next morning, I walked down the bustling city street, a cold but incredibly refreshing wind blowing off the harbor. I passed by a high-end department store, the mannequins in the large display window showing off pristine, perfectly tailored suits. I stopped for a moment and looked at the glass, seeing my own reflection superimposed over the luxury clothing. I was not the scared, bleeding kid in the hand-me-down rags anymore. I was a man who owned his narrative. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I navigated to the official website of a local non-profit organization that specifically provided high-quality, professional interview attire for underprivileged youth and young adults trying desperately to enter the corporate workforce. I typed in a massive donation amount, enough money to buy at least 50 brand new, perfectly tailored suits for kids who were standing exactly where I stood 3 years ago. I checked the box for a strictly anonymous donation and hit confirm. I did not do it for public recognition. I did not do it to boost my corporate profile. I did it because absolutely no young person, no matter their financial background or family situation, should ever have to walk into the biggest moment of their life feeling like they are wearing their own humiliation. Everyone deserves the chance to wear their own size. Everyone deserves the dignity of a fair fight. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Life has an incredibly funny, poetic way of balancing the books in the end. Sometimes the ultimate justice you seek does not come in the form of a dramatic courtroom lawsuit, an explosive inheritance dispute, or a screaming match at a family funeral. Sometimes the most devastating, absolute revenge you can inflict upon toxic, manipulative people is simply walking away, moving on, and becoming incredibly, undeniably successful without them. My parents spent their entire adult lives investing all their love, all their money, and all their hope into a golden child who turned out to be completely hollow inside. They gambled their entire future on a charismatic fraud, and they lost absolutely everything. I, on the other hand, built my strong foundation on relentless grit, intellectual honesty, and the unexpected kindness of strangers who saw my true worth when my own blood refused to look. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to make the agonizing decision to cut ties with the people who were supposed to love you the most, just to save your own sanity? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and I promise you, you are not alone in this fight for your own peace. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Until next time, remember, you are the sole author of your own story. Don't ever let anyone else hold the pen.